The sun bled low across the horizon, throwing long shadows over the dusty road that cut through the heart of the frontier settlement like a scar time refused to heal. Evening light clung to the boards of the small wooden church at the road's end, gilding it in a last, fading glory as if heaven itself bore witness to the scene unfolding in silence. She knelt in the dirt, hands resting upon her thighs, fingers trembling though her face remained eerily calm. Her white dress, once fine enough for Sunday gatherings and apple blossom dances, lay heavy with dust, its hem spread behind her like a fallen banner. A crown of wild flowers sat crooked over her tangled hair. Violets, daisies, bits of prairie grass woven by hands that believed joy was still something worth wearing. Now they hung dry and brittle, a memory more than an adornment. Around her, a ring of men stood like stone, ranchers, lawmen, drifters with hardened eyes. Their hats cast deep shadows across their faces, their silence louder than any sermon that might spill from the chapel door. Behind her came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, weighted with purpose. Each step raised a puff of red earth, and the crowd stiffened though none dared speak. The man who walked that road was a figure the frontier remembered. Tall as a storm cloud, shoulders broad enough to block the sun, bare chest crossed with scars earned in battles nobody cared to recount. His jaw was set like iron, his gaze fixed ahead, his hands gripping two weapons that gleamed with the kind of promise only blood knows. He did not walk quickly. He walked like a man who had already decided what must be done and came only to deliver it. The air, thick with heat and judgment, vibrated between them like a drawn bowstring. But to understand that moment, to feel the weight of what it meant, we must return to the morning before the world turned to ash. The day had begun with laughter, the kind that belonged to quiet places and simple dreams. The woman, whose name the wind now carried like a ghost, woke to birdsong drifting through the shutters of her cabin. Light spilled across her table, warming the shallow bowl of water where wildflowers floated, gathered by her hand just the evening before. Outside, wheat fields rippled like golden waves beneath a sky unmarred by smoke or sorrow. Her voice hummed softly as she braided her hair, weaving those same flowers into it with a tenderness that spoke of hope. He had risen earlier, chopping wood with the steady rhythm of a man who found peace in labor. His silhouette moved against the dawn, strong, patient, content. When she stepped into the yard, he paused, leaning on the axe handle, a smile like sunlight breaking across his face. They spoke little. They never needed many words. A shared glance, a brush of fingers, the comfortable quiet between them. These were their vows long before any preacher could bless them. He handed her a small carved figure, crude but heartfelt, something he'd shaped from juniper wood during long nights when sleep came slow. She held it against her chest, knowing the hours locked within it, the love that shaped each imperfect line. They were planning to ride to town by afternoon, speak with the elders, trade for supplies, maybe even whisper plans of a wedding. She dreamed aloud of building a home beyond the ridge, where the wind smelled of pine and the world felt wide and bright. He listened, eyes soft, and promised he would make it so. Then the riders came. It began as a rumble, distant hoofbeats threading through the calm like thunder foreshadowing ruin. She turned, brow furrowed, as dust rose on the horizon. The horses moved fast, too fast for peace. Within minutes the serenity shattered into screams, gunfire, splintered wood, and terror. Raiders swept through the settlement like locusts, faces masked, rifles firing into the air and into flesh alike. Fire caught on the thatch and leapt skyward, black smoke smothering the sun. She ran toward the children, calling names, searching for her young sister, who'd wandered off with a tin doll earlier that morning. Her voice was swallowed by chaos, by the crack of gunshots, by the choking roar of flames. She saw him fighting, one man against many, but for every raider he struck down, two more came. A rider tore her from the cabin's doorway, dragging her through dust and debris. She clawed at the earth, at the boots, at the hands that would take her, but she was thrown aside rather than taken, discarded like something unworthy of prize. When she rose again, coughing, eyes streaming, she saw her sister lifted onto a horse, tiny hands reaching back, mouth open in a scream she could not hear over the fire's riot. Then they were gone, vanishing toward the mountains, leaving ruin in their wake. By the time the warrior reached her, the raiders had disappeared into smoke and distance. He dropped to his knees beside her, bloodied, breath ragged. She collapsed into his arms, shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of loss. They searched through twisted beams and collapsed doorframes, calling her sister's name until their voices were raw. The once lively settlement now lay silent, bodies covered with sheets, embers crackling where homes once stood. No one spoke of hope. Not then. Not in those first hours of smoke and mourning. Days passed. She barely ate. She barely slept. She sat in the ruins, tracing the lines of her sister's footprints in ash, trying to memorize them before wind carried them away. Townsfolk gathered to rebuild, but whispers grew like weeds. Some blamed the raiders' fury on her, others on him, saying he'd angered the wrong men somewhere along the western trails. In a place where justice was thin and fear ran deep, blame was the easiest currency. They summoned her to stand before them, to account for sins that weren't hers. She was brought to the road where she now knelt, surrounded by men she once called neighbors. They demanded answers she could not give, accused her of drawing death to their doors with pride or foolishness or some imagined slight. She bowed her head, letting dust settle in her hair, accepting their judgment not from guilt but exhaustion. She had no voice left to defend herself. Then came the footsteps, slow, merciless, familiar. He returned from days spent tracking ghosts across ravines and riverbeds, returning with blood on his blades and rage in his eyes. He had found signs, broken arrow shafts, scorch markings on trees, trails leading north. He stood behind her now, a sentinel of flesh and fury, not begging mercy but declaring war. The gathered men shifted, uneasily, hands twitching near holsters, yet none dared speak. The air crackled like lightning waiting to strike. She did not look back at him. She didn't need to. She felt his presence like a storm building behind her, a promise that the world would soon tremble for taking what it had no right to claim. And in that charged silence, beneath the dying sun and watchful eyes of every soul present, the story truly began. Two hearts bound by loss, rising from dust with vengeance, burning brighter than any flame that had ever torn their lives apart. They left the town before sunrise, the sky still ink-dark and trembling with stars. No farewell was spoken, no blessing offered. The people watched from shuttered windows as the woman mounted a tired bay mare and the man walked beside her like a shadow cut from the night itself. His wounds were bound in strips of linen torn from his own shirt, but pain did not slow him. He kept his axes strapped across his back, shoulders squared, jaw carved from iron. She glanced at him now and then, unsure if he walked for her or for the memory of the girl they had lost. Grief followed them like a wolf with patient steps, never close enough to bite, but always near enough to feel its breath. The prairie opened before them, endless and unkind. Sagebrush rolled in silver waves beneath the moon, and coyotes cried out from far-off gulches as if mourning alongside them. The woman rode in silence, hands clenched on the reins, her heart a cracked vessel holding more sorrow than blood. The man walked with head lowered, scanning the ground for sign. Broken grass, scattered hoofprints, a scrap of cloth ripped in flight. Every piece of evidence fed his resolve like coals thrown into a furnace. At dawn he halted beside a dried creek bed and knelt to touch the earth, fingers drifting through dust and fragments of charred kindling. She slid from the saddle and knelt beside him, breathing smoke, ghosts that lingered in the ground like unburied voices. They camped here, he murmured, voice low as storm thunder. A day or two passed. Rode north after. She swallowed, throat tight. Then we follow. It was the first sentence she had spoken aloud since leaving the settlement, and the weight of it surprised her. He looked at her then, not as someone fragile, but as someone burning from within. He nodded once. They pressed onward. The sun grew merciless as noon climbed, baking the cracked earth until heat shimmered like glass. Sweat carved lines through the dust on their skin, and thirst scratched at their throats. Still they pushed on, because turning back meant surrender, and neither of them could bear the thought. By late afternoon, they reached a ravine where the wind whistled like something grieving. The man slowed, fishing a cartridge from the dirt with 2 fingers, still warm from the sun. Not old. She felt her pulse race, every breath a drumbeat of fear and hope. As night bled from the east, they found remnants of another camp. Tin cans torn open with hunger. A discarded shawl, small, embroidered with yellow thread. She held it to her chest as if it were bone or heartbeat. The man stood behind her, jaw locked, eyes rimmed in fire. "We're close," he said, and she believed him. But night birthed new dangers. They made camp beneath jagged canyon walls, the moon casting pale bones of light across sand and stone. The woman lay, with the shawl clutched beneath her cheek, like a lost prayer. The man kept watch, back straight, knife resting across his knee. Hours passed in silence, until a rustle like snake scale on gravel broke the stillness. He rose at once. A shadow darted between boulders. His blade caught moonlight. He stepped forward, but arrows fell first. One slammed into the dirt inches from her hand. Another struck the embers of their fire, sending sparks dancing like mad spirits into the night. She screamed, scrambling to her feet. The man moved fast, faster than breath. He hurled himself toward her, shielding her with his body as more arrows cut the dark. His voice was sharp and urgent. "Run!" She couldn't. Fear rooted her like a tree struck by lightning. She clung to the shawl, trembling, eyes wide and useless. Shapes surged out of the canyon, lean figures with painted faces and desperation in their hunger. Raiders, or those broken by the same raiders who'd shattered her world. The man met them head-on, blades flashing like silver lightning. He fought with the force of a promise, each strike answering a cry torn from old wounds. Blood hit sand. A man dropped. Another lunged. The woman watched frozen as he was overwhelmed, a blade slicing across his side, dark at first, then bright as it poured. Something snapped inside her, not fear, but fury. She seized a fallen raider's pistol, hands shaking like leaves in a storm. One breath, one pull. The crack split the night like thunder. A raider fell. Another wheeled toward her, eyes burning. She fired again, barely aiming, teeth clenched, heart roaring like wildfire. When the last attacker fled, leaving bodies cooling beneath moonlight, she stood gasping, gun slipping from her grasp. Her legs gave way. The man caught her before she hit the ground. "You saved my life," he whispered, voice raw. She shook her head, weeping. "You've been saving mine since the day they took her," she answered. In that moment, something changed between them, not love newly born, but love sharpened by grief into steel. His wound bled fiercely. She tore strips from her dress and bound him. Hands, steady though tears, streaked dirt down her cheeks. When she finished, he rested a hand on her shoulder, not as a warrior thanking an ally, but as a man acknowledging someone who had chosen to stand beside him rather than behind. They sat close through the remaining hours of night, listening to the canyon winds whisper like ghosts. Dawn arrived in pale rose, painting their weary faces with a fragile kind of hope. They rode on at first light, following tracks that wove through scrub and over rock. By midday, they found a man collapsed near a dried water hole, skin burnt, breath shallow, a chain still hanging from his wrist. He flinched when they approached, raising trembling hands. "No more," he pleaded. "I ain't one of them. Swear it." The woman knelt beside him, offering water. The man hesitated, hand hovering near his axe, mistrust written in every line of his body. The stranger coughed, drank slow, voice cracking like drought-stricken timber. He told them he'd been forced to ride with the raiders, his family taken same as theirs. He'd escaped when the others rode ahead. He spoke of a camp deep in the northern mountains, guarded and merciless, where captives were traded like cattle. Hope stabbed her like pain. Her sister might still breathe. But trust was a scarce commodity in land carved by betrayal. The warrior looked to the woman, waiting for her judgment. She studied the stranger's eyes, haunted, hollow, too broken to lie convincingly. "We take him with us," she said softly. "If he betrays us, we end it quick." The man nodded, though reluctance darkened his gaze. They gave the stranger a horse, and he rode between them like a thread of uncertainty. Storm clouds rose by evening, black and swollen like the grief they carried. Rain lashed them as they crossed the river, cold and relentless. They found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, water roaring in sheets around them. The woman shivered, knees pulled to her chest, face lit by crackling lightning. The man sat close, voice low. He spoke of guilt for not being there when the raiders came. She spoke of nightmares where her sister called her name across burning fields. Their confessions braided like rope, binding them in something stronger than silence. The storm passed near dawn, but the world it left behind felt sharper, hungrier. They resumed the trail, stranger guiding them with hesitant certainty. Mountains rose ahead like the teeth of some great beast. Somewhere beyond those peaks, the raiders waited. Somewhere a girl lived or did not live, and they would find the truth, even if the earth itself tried to swallow them first. Dawn rose pale and uncertain, filtering through the pines like light afraid to fully touch the earth. The woman sat her horse at the tree line, breath visible in the cold morning air, heart pulsing like a drum in the stillness. Beyond the ridge lay the raider stronghold, half hidden by fog and fortified with sharpened stakes, hides stretched as tents, fires smoldering like coals waiting for wind. She could not see the faces of those within, but she could feel them. Men who had stolen her sister, who had burned her world and laughed while doing it. Her hands trembled, but she did not loosen her grip on the reins. Fear lived inside her, yes, but it was no longer master. It was fuel. The man sat his stallion beside her, posture rigid despite the wound that still pained him. The stranger, weaker but determined, pointed to a break in the barricade where watchmen dozed lazy after night's vigil. "We go quiet," he whispered, voice cracked like old leather. "Silent as shadow if we want to breathe past sunrise." The woman nodded, slipping from her saddle, feet sinking into frost-stiff moss. Her breath came slow, controlled. She had never been a warrior, but she had learned what loss could shape a soul into. The man's hand brushed hers for the briefest moment, not a comfort but an acknowledgement. They moved, stooped low, blades drawn. They slipped between stumps and brush, each step measured against the snap of a twig. The world held its breath with them. The man led, body tense as a drawn bow, every sense alive to danger. The woman followed, eyes sharp, mind blazing with purpose. When a guard stirred by the fence, she stepped forward first, pressing a cloth to his mouth, holding fast until he fell still in her arms. His weight shook her, but she lowered him gently, jaw clenched. The man watched her with something like sorrow and something like pride. Inside the camp, the smell of smoke and sweat and unwashed bodies clung to the air. Men snored in furs, weapons propped near fire pits. Horses pawed the dirt restlessly, sensing tension that had yet to break through. The stranger guided them through shadows, past crates of stolen goods, silver cups, children's toys, blankets embroidered by hands that once danced freely over fabric. The woman's eyes lingered on a worn doll left in the dirt, its dress burned at the hem. Her throat tightened, but she moved on. Near the largest tent, she heard a sound unlike any other, small, familiar, a breath like the flutter of sparrow wings. She pushed aside the flap before doubt could chain her. Inside, by dim lantern light, sat her sister, hair tangled, cheeks stained with dirt and fear. The girl looked up, eyes wide, and the world collapsed into a single heartbeat. The woman dropped to her knees, gathering that fragile body into her arms as tears forged new rivers down her face. The girl clung to her as if afraid she were only another dream that would run with morning. The man stood guard at the tent's mouth, scanning shadows for movement. Hope lived in his posture now, fighting with fury like wildfire competing with thunder. But the moment snapped like a trap when a horn rang sharp through the camp, sudden and vicious. Raiders burst from tents, rifles raised, voices splitting the air. The stranger froze, Horror etched across his bruised jaw. He had not betrayed them, but fear and chance had betrayed all three. Everything happened fast. The man shoved the girl into her sister's arms. "Run," he ordered, voice thunderstrong. But the woman shook her head. She had run once. She would not run again. Raiders charged, boots pounding, guns up. The man's axes flashed as he met them head-on with terrifying grace, each swing cracking bone and scattering foes like wheat before a scythe. The woman backed into the tent, shielding her sister, firing shots with trembling precision. Smoke filled her nose, ears pounded with screams. Firelight danced over steel and blood, over the man who fought like death given form. Then the raider chief stepped forward. Broad as an ox, face scarred like earth struck by lightning, he strode through chaos with cruel delight flashing in his ruined eyes. A massive blade hung in his fist, chipped and stained. He met the warrior in a clash like mountains colliding. Their bodies slammed, blades rang, sparks cut the air. The woman watched, heart tearing with every strike. The man stumbled once, blood darkening his side anew. The chief laughed, raising his blade for a killing blow. She did not think. She moved. She thrust her sister behind her and seized the man's fallen axe from the dirt. Its weight nearly broke her arm, but she hefted it. Mind blank with clarity, she charged. Fear screamed, but resolve drowned it. She struck the chief's back with a cry not of rage, but of grief unleashed. The steel bit deep. He howled, turning, striking her across the ribs with the back of his hand, sending her sprawling. Pain blinded her. Breath left her lungs like stolen air. But she rose. Shaking, bleeding, she rose again. He came toward her, blade hungry. The man tried to intervene, but 4 raiders pinned him, blades at his throat. The camp seemed to hold still, watching. The woman gripped the axe, knuckles white, lungs burning. She saw the river, the wheat fields, her sister's small hand fading in smoke. She saw herself kneeling in dust while her world judged her weak. No more. She stepped forward, one breath, one heartbeat, one strike. The axe plunged into the chief's chest. His eyes widened like a man witnessing the impossible. He fell to his knees, then to the earth. Silence swallowed the camp whole. The raiders faltered, staring as if the world's order had been split clean through. The man tore free, killing those who held him. The rest fled into forest shade, ghosts of wickedness broken by the woman they once deemed powerless. Smoke thinned. Horses stood silent. The girl wept into her sister's dress. The man crossed the space between them, blood and ash streaking his face like war paint. He cupped her jaw with hands roughened by loss and survival. She leaned into that touch, breath unsteady but alive in a way she had never known. "You saved us all," he said quietly, voice gentled like dawn. She shook her head, but he held her gaze. "You rose," he whispered, "when the world told you to kneel." Together they burned the camp to the ground, freeing captives, gathering the broken pieces of what remained. As sunrise crept over the mountains, they rode with her sister between them, small arms wrapped around the woman's waist. The land felt wide again, but no longer empty. The man glanced at her, eyes soft beneath scars. She looked forward, wind in her hair, strength in her spine. Maybe the frontier did not break her. Maybe it forged her, and the world would remember the day she rose from dust to change her fate with her own trembling, fearless hands.